Is Pope Benedict XVI still the Pope? Did he create an impeded see? According to Patrick Coffin, the answer would be yes. And according to my view, well, maybe not so much, but stick around to find out.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
So as many of you already know, I've done multiple shows on the question of whether or not Pope Benedict is the Pope, Pope Francis is the Pope, or maybe somehow they're both sharing the papacy and it's been bifurcated. I've done at least 3 shows here on this channel on this question. I've also done one for Catholic Answers. So I've certainly gone into a great deal of detail. I've also reviewed Patrick Coffin's video, his main video promoting his perspective on Pope Benedict, and so I can refer you to those. I'll put it in the show notes, but this is coming back up again because of something that was just posted on Facebook. Let me share my screen, and you'll have the context. So yesterday, I believe, a post was made about myself and some others who are going to be doing some shows on William's channel. And Patrick Coffin comments and says, in all, we'll defend antipope Bergoglio. So, as it probably doesn't come as a surprise, Patrick Coffin believes that Bergoglio is not actually the Pope. So Pope Francis is not the Pope, and Pope Benedict XVI is still the Pope. I thought it was an interesting response that Eric gave. It's pretty similar to my own thoughts. He says, hey, we are just following Pope Benedict XVI. Isn't he the Pope? Someone needs to convince him before he falls asleep in the Lord, or else we will have an even greater canonical and jurisprudential pinball game on our hands. And Patrick responded, he doesn't need convincing. He knows he created an impeded see. It's all in Andrea Cianci, don't know how to pronounce him, new book, Codex Ratzinger. Have not read this book. Have y'all read it? If so, I'd like to hear about it. This is the first I've heard about it. I wasn't able to find a whole lot about it when I typed it in just now on Google, so I don't know if it's translated in English, but if it has been, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. In fact, I'd like to hear your thoughts, period, on this question. Is Pope Benedict XVI still the Pope? I argue he's not. I argue, according to Benedict XVI, he's not. Patrick Coffin says he created an impeded see, and he doesn't need convincing. He knows what he is doing, and he knows he's the Pope. Again, I'd like to hear from you. Is that the case? If you believe that, please put it in the comment section. I'd love to hear some evidence for it. Make sure to tag me in the comment section at Reason in Theology. In the meantime, I want to read a couple things to you from Pope Benedict XVI himself that I think undermines this position. Let's see. This was from Daily Beast, but it's reported multiple places. Benedict XVI has given his final word, his autobiography, Benedict XVI, Final Conversations, published September 9th in Italian and German. And by the way, this was published in 2016. Is the fruit of a series of long interviews by German journalist and papal confidant Peter Seewald. And notice one of the things that's said here. Here we go. Here's a quote from it. It was not a retirement, again, this is Benedict speaking. It was not a retirement made under the pressure of events or a flight made due to the incapacity to face them, he says. No one tried to blackmail me. I would not have allowed it. If they had tried, I would not have gone because it is not right to leave when under pressure. And it is not true that I was disappointed or anything like that. He sure doesn't seem to be under the impression that he did not abdicate the papal throne. And then over here, another source, February 26, 2014. This is coming from AP News. Retired Pope Benedict XVI has denied speculation that he was pressured to leave office, saying his decision was freely made and his alone. Benedict wrote to the Vatican correspondent for La Stampa newspaper, Andrea Tornielli, amid a new round of speculation about his reasons ahead of Friday's first anniversary of the first resignation by a pope in 600 years. And here's a quote. There isn't the slightest doubt about the validity of my resignation from the Petrine ministry, La Stampa quoted Benedict as writing. The only condition for the validity is the full freedom of the decision. Speculation about its invalidity is simply absurd. Now, I know there's some arguments surrounding the question of ministry and office. Again, I can refer you to the videos I've already done addressing those. But again, it doesn't seem that he is under the impression that he is still the Pope. But according to Patrick Coffin, he knows that he's still the Pope, and he created an impeded see. I don't see any evidence for that in light of what Benedict is saying. So if I understand Coffin's perspective and position correctly, Benedict seemed to abdicate, but he didn't really abdicate and didn't really intend to abdicate. And he's still the Pope, even though he tells us that he's not anymore and that he abdicated. But in reality, he really is. So if I listen to the Pope, he's telling me he's not the Pope anymore. But I'm supposed to still believe that he's the Pope in spite of what he's saying. Why would I follow this person? And how is he shepherding my soul as the Pope when he no longer recognizes himself as the Pope? How am I to be in communion with such a Pope when none of the bishops that are around me that I could be in communion with are in communion with this Pope? But is it really the case that the Pope is so deceptive that he would give the appearance that he abdicates, but not really abdicate, but then continue to claim that he abdicated, but he didn't really abdicate? And I'm supposed to follow this person? And that's a reasonable perspective? I don't know. To me, it seems easier to believe that Pope Francis is the Pope in light of all that he's done than that theory. But maybe I'm wrong. Hey, I'd like to hear if I'm wrong. Please put it in the chat. Let's hear some arguments, if there are any. Have y'all come across this book recently? Codex Ratzinger. Wasn't able to really find anything there. Let's see what we got going on in the chat. It's always interesting to hear how people say Bergoglio. The GL sound exists only in Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, if I call correctly. Okay. I'm still gonna say it the same way, just so you know. How far are you from Shreveport? How often do you have the Byzantine Catholic Mass in Monroe? Well, we usually have the liturgy once a month. And then as far as how far from Shreveport, an hour and a half. But we're way off topic here. But I appreciate the question. Evan says, I'm surprised Patrick would engage in Facebook comment section instead of just coming on your show to discuss the issue in depth, as he reached out behind the scenes to ask you on his show. No. And I never heard any interaction with my response to his video either. Let's see. You should bring Coffin on and hear him out. I've heard him out already, but yeah, I don't mind bringing him on to hear what he's already presented and what I've already responded to, unless he has a response to what I've already offered in response to his position. But to just repeat what he's already said, I've already responded to what he said. So I'd like to hear some interaction with my position. Let's see. Well, I see some other questions here in the chat, and they look tempting, but they're completely off track, y'all. Way off track. Has Coffin's bishop said anything about this? I don't know, James. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. I don't know where he's located, who his bishop is. I've never had any interest in looking into that or had a need to do so. I don't know if he has a bishop he's in communion with, if he's someone who maintains that Benedict is still Pope. What bishop could he be in communion with? Are there any bishops out there that are in communion with Pope Benedict right now, that believe that Pope Benedict is the Pope, and they're under Benedict's authority? Does that exist? It might. I mean, let me know if it does. I mean, I'm not familiar with every bishop out there, and you might have somebody. And again, I don't know Patrick's situation, but I don't know how you could even be in communion with Pope Benedict is one of my concerns. How does that work? Let's say he is the Pope. Let's say he still is. How are we in communion with the Pope as laity? Well, the way that we are in communion with the Pope is that we're under the authority of a bishop who is under the Pope, who is under his authority, who is in communion with him. If I all of a sudden embraced that Benedict is the Pope, I don't know how I would be in communion with the Bishop of Rome, because I don't know any bishops that maintain that Benedict is still the Pope. There might be some out there. And if I find that bishop, let's say he's in New Zealand or something, and I'm over here in the United States, do I just email the bishop and say, hey, I want to be in communion with you so I could be in communion with Pope Benedict? And does Pope Benedict recognize the communion of that bishop? Does he say, yes, I'm in communion with you and you're under my authority? Does Pope Benedict maintain that, or does Pope Benedict maintain that he's not the Pope anymore and that we're to be under the authority of Pope Francis? I'm just trying to figure out how this practically works. Help me out here. If I'm, I could be misunderstanding something, or maybe there's an element of ecclesiology that I'm not aware of. Perhaps it's possible for us to be immediately in communion with a Pope without a bishop. I know in some rare circumstances that's possible, but usually you still, even if you're not in communion with a bishop, there's still an ordinary. So, for example, the personal ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter, when it first started out, a Monsignor who was not a bishop was the ordinary. But you were in communion with that ordinary who was in communion with Pope, and that's how you were then in communion with Pope Benedict at the time, and then later on Pope Francis. Now it's since then received a bishop, but either way, you had an ordinary that you were in communion with. Are there any ordinaries out there that I could reach out to an email and say, hey, I want to be under your jurisdiction, and Pope Benedict recognizes that ordinary, and the ordinary recognizes Pope Benedict, and now I have Catholic communion with the Pope? Or is there some kind of immediate way that I can be in communion with the Pope, even though he's telling me he's not the Pope anymore? And why would I want to be in communion with somebody who is deceiving me, saying, I resigned, but I didn't really resign. I mean, I gave the appearance that I resigned, but I didn't really resign. Even though I just said again that I resigned, but it wasn't real. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint, wink, wink, right? Why would I be in communion with that person? Don't we already have enough problems in the church? Now I have to be in communion with somebody who doesn't even recognize that he's the Pope? To me, it seems like this creates more problems than it solves. But again, maybe I'm missing something. Let me know in the chat. Put it to Reason and Theology. let's see it. I certainly have had blind spots, lack of information, ignorance, plenty of times. So I could be missing something here. Let's see. Absurd Scandal asks, in fact, this even brings up an interesting question. Could the Spirit, that is the Holy Spirit, protect the church by allowing cardinals elected by an antipope, most believe is real pope, to elect valid pope later? Can you maybe rephrase that one for me? Nate says, it's sad to see how much deeper Patrick Coffin has fallen his practically sedevacantist position. Well, now I understand what you mean by practically sedevacantist. Now, obviously, he's going to say he's not a sedevacantist because he's going to say that there is a pope. So the see is not vacant. He's going to say Pope Benedict is. But if Pope Benedict is not the pope, and Pope Francis is, I wouldn't call that sedevacantism. I would call that schism. That would be the very definition of schism. So if let's say Pope Francis is the pope and Pope Benedict is not, and you're claiming that Pope Benedict is the pope and Pope Francis is not, that is the very definition of schism. Now, that doesn't mean that you're automatically culpable. You're formally a schismatic. I'm not judging Patrick Coffin and saying he's formally a schismatic and somehow he's in grave sin or something like that. I'm not judging that. But objectively, materially, if Pope Francis is the pope and one were to say Pope Francis is not the pope, materially that is schismatic. Again, I'm not making any judgments on the person's culpability or interior disposition or if they're adding form to that schism. But objectively and materially, that is schism. That's the very definition of schism in canon law. So I understand where you're coming from, but I would still say even if Patrick Coffin is wrong, I wouldn't say he's a sedevacantist. I would just say that that's schismatic. It's not the same thing. Now, when Pope Benedict dies, then he would become a sedevacantist. So maybe a sedevacantist in the making. James says, from what I recall, when I used to listen to him, he was living in Cali for a while, and he worked at Catholic Answers and was originally from Canada. I don't know where he lives now. I don't know. Doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter. Any arguments, however, that y'all have seen for this that I haven't presented on the channel, I want to hear those, or those of y'all who maybe have heard of Andrea's book, Codex Ratzinger. Any good? Y'all read it? Is there anything in English? Can you maybe send me a link to it? Contemplative Soul says, I want to know who's taken over Pope Michael's papacy. Good question. Good question. Is it still going? Are his family members continuing that? Let's see. It's Brother Bugnolo's blog from Rome and Bishop Garcita. I don't know exactly what you're saying, Wesley. Are you saying Bishop Garcita is Benevacantis? Or he affirms that Pope Benedict is still the Pope? That vaguely sounds right, if that's what you're saying. I vaguely recall something about that a while back. Matthew says, what if people thought Celestine V never retired and everyone after him is just an antipope? Right. Yeah. I just think that at the end of the day, I think God would, I guess, do a better job at identifying or giving his church the ability to identify who the Pope is than that scenario, I suppose. Okay, so here we go. Retired Bishop Rene Gracita of Corpus Christi is the one bishop on his blog, Abbasis, who endorses Bognolo's explanation of canon law. Yeah, I vaguely recall reading that a few years back. I didn't know if he was still around and still maintaining that. So I guess what. All right. So would I email Bishop Gracita and say, hey, I want to be in communion with you? I suppose Bishop Gracita's now territory and jurisdiction covers the entire earth if he's the only bishop who believes that Pope Benedict is a pope. So I guess his jurisdiction covers the entire earth. So I could be anywhere in the world. I guess I would just email him and say, hey, I want to be in communion with you. Is that the way it works? And then so he affirms that Pope Benedict is pope. Does Pope Benedict affirm that he is Bishop Gracita's pope? Is that, does the Pope have to affirm that, or does he not actually have to affirm it, but the bishop is still in communion with him, even though the Bishop of Rome doesn't acknowledge as being his bishop, the Bishop of Rome or his Pope? I'm just trying to figure this out. How does this work practically? Because look, I came from Protestantism, where I was very clearly outside of communion with the Bishop of Rome. So being in communion with the Bishop of Rome is important to me. I also came back from Orthodoxy for this very reason, because I saw the necessity of being in communion with the Bishop of Rome. So I'm very attuned to questions of being in communion with Pope. And so the way that you're in communion with a Pope is through an ordinary or a bishop who's in communion with him. And of course, that Pope would acknowledge that he is the Pope, right? But how does that work when he's not acknowledging that he's the Pope? And do I just email this one bishop who's left in the world? How does this work? I want to know. Let's see. It's kind of like sedevacantism. One of my difficulties here, although I have a lot of difficulties with sedevacantism, one of my difficulties is, how do I practically live as a sedevacantist if sedevacantism were true? Like, what's the nearest sedevacantist bishop to me that I would be in communion with? And who would I receive the sacraments from as a sedevacantist? Or would I just never receive the sacraments? Is that part of the scenario here? I just never receive the sacraments. How am I better off than I was when I was in Protestantism if I'm not going to receive the sacraments anymore? What's the practical difference between the sedevacantism and Protestantism for me? I don't know. Let's see. See some questions about cardinals and stuff, but yeah. But does anybody have anything about the book Codex Ratzinger? Again, this is the first I saw about. I saw it, and he's saying that it's all in the book. It's all in the book. Okay. I'd like to check out the book. I couldn't find any English translations, but I only did a quick Google search. Maybe it's out there somewhere. Maybe if y'all find it, let me know. Email it to me. Or if you have practical tips on how I could be in communion with Pope Benedict XVI, if I were to concede Patrick Coffin's position, give me some practical tips on how I could be in communion with Pope Benedict when he doesn't recognize it. He's the Pope, and there's only one bishop alive in the world, to my knowledge, that would affirm that he's the Pope. Maybe let me know. Do I just email Bishop Gracita? Do y'all have his email address? And I guess that would work. I mean, I'm over here in Louisiana. I think he's in Texas, right? Corpus Christi. But I think his jurisdiction would apply to the entire world, since he's the only bishop left who recognizes him. So I guess I could just email him and say, hey, I want to be under your authority. And I suppose that will do it, right? I mean, it's necessary for me to be in communion with the Pope for my salvation. I mean, unum sanctum, right? It's necessary for me to submit to the Pope for my salvation. Well, I want to make sure that I'm doing this. So if I become convinced of Patrick Coffin's position, I need to know practically how to do this. So, but maybe Patrick Coffin can tell us also how to do this, or how he does it. I mean, I'm sure he knows from experience how he's in communion with Pope Benedict. Maybe he's sent an email to Bishop Gracita. Maybe he can tell us how he's in communion with Pope Benedict, so that we can also know how to be in communion with Pope Benedict. Interesting stuff. Y'all stay tuned here in just a moment. I am going to be doing a review of a video that was sent to me by a patron with over 1 million views on this video. It's called Aliens in the Vatican with Tom Horn, not Trent Horn, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam on Sid Roth's It's Supernatural. Stay tuned for that coming up. Probably do it in an hour or so. So y'all look for a link. All right. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Of course, check me out. Patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to get access to extra content. I just posted some stuff earlier, so go check it out. See you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.